It's really an honor to be here with Tom Glocer, who has been properly introduced, I believe, and who has just, no, you didn't fall off the chair, did you?
The blank one.
Okay, and I tell you what, if you know you don't need me to introduce Tom Glocer because you have all the bio available in your material, but yesterday when I first saw him, he said, I have something to tell you. I don't know how I get your column every week, but I read it. So I think he was just making very sure that I'm going to be very easy on him today.
It wouldn't work.
So then you are being introduced here, Tom, as the Chief Executive Officer of Thomson Reuters, the world's leading source of intelligent information for business and professionals. Now, some people say that you, being focused on information, have lost sense of the news part of your organization. Do you agree that you have become more an information provider than a news provider?
You know, it's a label and a distinction that I at least don't pay a lot of attention to. News is at the historical heart of Reuters, founded in 1851 in London, first in the region here in 1865 in Alexandria. So, and today we have 3,000 journalists. We've doubled the number of journalists in the time I've been in the company. So it is true that the news is an integral part of professional information offerings, but where the news ends and the quote-unquote data begins, for us is a very gray continuum.
What about venturing into blogging? I think you're hiring journalists that you're calling bloggers. What does that mean?
You know, again, I think the risk is we tend to take snapshots at different points in the evolution of technology and overlook that the key issue isn't the tool that you use or whether you print on paper or you print on electronic paper. It's what's the content. So blogging, you know, a lot of journalists who enjoy having a two-way conversation have taken to the form because it's actually a much better way, but not at all a revolutionary idea. I mean, when you think about letters to the editor in a formal newspaper, this was an asynchronous form of blogging. The only problem was you printed one day, you waited till the mail brought you a formal letter and you published the letter. Well, now you can do it faster, so that's great.
Yeah, but traditionally you have been sort of the backbone of verifying, double sourcing. This is, we're brought up as journalists with that tradition. You double source it, you make sure it's authentic before you put it out. Blogging is basically thinking on your feet and not really going back to double sourcing. Is that not an endangerment of news to be trusted?
On our professional news files, whether we deliver to media organizations or financial firms or now professionals writ large, the same standards of editing and sourcing apply. We do allow, in fact, we encourage our journalists to also blog in different media, mostly through our own services. But when it carries a Reuters name, the same standards apply. It's just a different tool set.
What about Twitter? What about tweeting? Is this, some people think of this as gossip, anonymous gossip even at best. And is this the next thing for journalism? We're going to end up tweeting and not really being accountable because we are anonymous?
Well, you know, I think what makes you accountable is your brand, the identification of who is the source, some unwritten and some written rules of what that implies to the consumer. So what's our sourcing rule? What training has the journalist had? Have there been two sets of eyes to look at the copy? You know, if you run that through a technology that says you have 140 characters to do it, as long as we have a Reuters feed attached to, you can follow Reuters on Twitter, and it's the exact same news, just in a bite-sized format, same sourcing rules, same standards. So yeah, I think it's fine.
Take me to the future in as far as where you are going to be. I'm sure you have a strategy. So where will you be in 5 years? You as Reuters, Thomson Reuters, and where will the media be in 10 years? Take me to the future.
Sure. Well, certainly for us, it's a lot clearer, I'd say, than the consumer media world writ large. So what we're all about at Essence is providing content and software tools for professionals to do their jobs. The traditional market for us for 150 years was the news agency. So professional publications, professional broadcasters continue to rely on our content to some extent even more than before because of the atrophying of news gathering operations. But similarly, banks, law firms, pharmaceutical companies, accountants, tax professionals, we supply the world with the content and software they need to actually do their jobs. And because of that, the strategy is more tightly related to a way we know can be monetized. And you only have to ask the question whether it's about the Middle East, the Gulf, or about Asia. Do you believe that in 10 years there will be more scientists, more portfolio managers, more bankers than there are today? If the answer is yes, that implies significant growth potential for our business.
So the idea is, do you think it's going to be more global, or will there be a particular identity, let's say, to media in the Gulf region?
Well, people still, despite all the technology, we human beings still can only live in one place at one time. There's a very interesting transition going on now, certainly in my children, your children's generation, who have friends all across the world join through Skype and Twitter and Facebook, et cetera. But there will still be, I hope, cultural differences, because I think that's what makes the world interesting. I certainly find that as a manager. And there'll be differences reflected, therefore, in the media and the social norms of different civilizations.
The social media, obviously, is very good at mass mobilization. It has played a very important role in Tunisia and in Egypt. Well, tell me, how do you feel about that first, that it has been part of a revolution?
Well, I think individuals, whether revolutionary or on the other side of history, have always used all the available tools, right? In the American Revolution, it was pamphleteers with a printing press. I think the cardinal rule of every coup d'etat, let's say across the African continent, was first take the presidential palace, then take the radio station. Right. Well, the interesting thing is, of course, that's a lot harder to do if the radio station lives in everyone's home. And I think it's, it's fantastic to watch the tools being put to some very good uses, because we also all know the darker side that the tools can be used, whether it's child pornography or harassment on the web, et cetera.
So then, when they, in the past, have gone to, sort of shut down the television station or the radio station in order to shut down the communication, now it's being replaced by shutting down or trying to have restrictions on the media, social media outlets. I mean, we have countries who have prevented that from taking place, such as in China, such as maybe in Iran. I don't think that there is that access to the social media as there has been in Egypt or in Tunisia. In that case, can the social media be playing unintentionally a role in making a change in one place and protecting change or preventing change in other places?
I think it's possible. I mean, don't forget, even in the current revolutions, the Egyptian authorities tried to stop Reuters from broadcasting from Tahrir Square. In the end, we managed to put out 117 straight hours, but we did it by having to be very inventive in the technology we used. When we could no longer use the conventional phone lines or satellite lines, we kept moving eventually onto some rather new age ways to squirt out the pictures, but we managed to stay on the air the whole time.
Yeah, but then again, Let me just be provocative on behalf of some people who are critical of the role of the social media. They would say that change has happened in areas where there was a relative amount of freedom, a relative amount of democracy. And therefore, so if change is brought into a place where there is already democracy or freedom, whereas it's being spared by countries which are more theocratic, more, against, how do you justify then a role of a social media to become a sort of a party, a political party, or an alternative to what has existed before?
I mean, I think the issue is really one of timing, right? Nikesh earlier used the analogy of water finding its level. I'm not sure that's the perfect analogy for news and information, but it is true that different governments with varying degrees of success have tried to stop the flow of information. In Egypt, Mubarak tried to take down the entire internet, which led, I think, to an even greater reaction of hostility. There are other regimes around the world, who are more effective at filtering. But even there, it's a cat and mouse game played, and eventually, I think those tactics will fail, and when they do, they'll fail in a dramatic and more revolutionary way.
Elaborate, please. Do you mean that those countries blocking right now the impact of the youth, the people, the change makers, that these countries that are now successfully blocking that, they will eventually fail because of technological reasons?
Technology will play a part, and I think it has come to be seen as a basic human right to have internet access, whether formalized or not. Hillary Clinton made a speech last year essentially moving in that direction. And I think systematic denial of freedom of access to information will, over time, lead to a revolution in and of itself.
So how soon might that be the case? Technologically speaking, and time span of what you're talking about? Are we talking this is happening in months or in years?
Well, I think you can't generalize. It'll be months in some places, and it'll be many, many years in others. And it's not at all it's not just a simple fight of technology versus those who are trying to suppress. There's a lot of states in the middle.
I'm going to try to bring in some of the audience to this conversation, come in with a couple of comments or questions, and then I'll go on with Tom. Anybody wants to come in with a question or a statement? Yes, please. Could you? It would be nice to introduce yourself kindly.
Hi, Tom. I'm Nasser Batley. You've talked a bit about social media, Twitter, Facebook, blogs. But what is your view on platforms like demand media, which are creating content using technology and then using crowdsourcing to produce that content for a fraction of the cost that you are doing it at? And is that something that you think is now disrupting the model?
Well, I think demand media and similar technologies is an interesting development, but it also raises, to me at least, an interesting philosophical question about, do you need an underlying event, let's call it a news event, to take place in reality, followed by which traditional news publishers, as well as all of us as citizen journalists, write about it, so fact leads to writing? Or do you start the other way around? Do you begin by mining, as they do, search queries, see what topics are trending hot, and then, in essence, go back and commission the content that it would answer those, those search queries? And it's not to say that the fact doesn't also exist, but one could imagine a sort of parallel world. Yesterday we had such an interesting conversation about 3D filmmaking, where the actual reality of what goes on, what we used to call facts or news events, don't matter, and everything begins by there are a bunch of searches for write about green men on Mars, and whether they actually exist or not is somewhat secondary. So those are the sort of things we think about, but you know, we also mine our user data quite extensively across the professional Thomson Reuters products and attempt to tune our products and our UIs to meet user demand.
Another question or comment from the floor? Not yet? Okay, I'll get back into the conversation. Yes, all right, I have a couple, please, right here.
I don't know exactly the time frame of this, but I remember there was a video leaked by WikiLeaks about a Reuters cameraman dying in Iraq. And I know that the video you guys had earlier on, but you couldn't release it out. So how do you feel when there are people like WikiLeaks leading information out that you guys have to protect or can't leak because of government and other pressures that your organization face?
We didn't have the video. We would have run with the video. Our editors would have made a news judgment, but I assume that judgment would have been to run with the video. The video was actually from an onboard helicopter, U.S. Army helicopter, and so we had demanded it for well over a year in Freedom of Information Act and directly in proceedings. But you know, the Army had refused, Department of Defense had refused to make it available. That's when WikiLeaks got it, however they get it, and how it became public. But yeah, the tragedy for us is that all too often, especially our video and photography journalists who have to be so close to the action, 2 of them were killed that day.
Gentleman right here, please.
Thank you. My question is twofold. The first is, how do you see the new content and the user-generated content, the new media and the user-generated content threatening your business model? And did you, in the past few years, did you notice a loss of revenue because of the emergence of this new media? And the second, this new media, is it affecting the level of credibility? And sometimes do you have to compromise the ethics that you base your news on when you publish them?
Well, first of all, I'm not the editor-in-chief, so I don't make those calls. But I'm close enough to him that I know the answer, which is I would fire him and he would fire me if we did anything to compromise the ethical standards because of competition or just a general sort of dumbing down of content in the world. I've always thought it's a too much of a black and white distinction between, you know, user-generated content and this somehow priestly professional content, because actually it's always been more complex than that. We have 3,000 journalists around the world, but in addition, for 100 years, we and many other media organizations have used stringers. And stringers are simply people who you don't have a full-time employment contract with, but have a contractual relationship, sometimes almost like full employment, sometimes on a more casual basis. So I always ask the question, if one is willing to use a stringer and publish their material as Reuters content in our case, what is citizen journalists or user-generated content other than the next concentric circle beyond that? And what ends up being important is to ask the question, what brand am I publishing on? Do I make a distinction between somebody I have an employment relation with or some other relationship? What am I saying about the editing standards? What am I saying about the sourcing standards, et cetera? And so getting away from the label. The other thing we often joke about inside Thomson Reuters is, you know, we think 40 years ago we invented user-generated content by going to all of our banking clients and saying, please give us your rates. Please give us the prices at which you're willing to buy and sell foreign currencies or other securities. We would aggregate them and broadcast them back in effect. Now, if that isn't user-generated content, I don't know what is, but it's done in a professional context, and because you identify what bank it's from, it's, you know, considered very reliable.
I'll take one more question here, the gentleman.
Yes, hello. Is there a new breed of journalist which needs to be able to work on camera, on blogs, on social networks, and work very differently than traditional sort of silo journalists. So that's the first question. The other question is there a new breed of journalism where, if Nikesh's vision is true, which it probably is, then everybody would be able to communicate in languages other than their own all over the world? So would you look at journalism transcending borders and being Arab news just translated to Swedish where I live and so forth? How do you see that pan out? And would that entail international opportunities for local media companies?
So to your first question, I think the answer is yes. There is both an opportunity and a need to have a new generation of journalists, but I don't think we need to worry about it. I don't think we need to open special, graduate schools, because it happens naturally. The generation of kids growing up, including mine, that are digital natives rather than digital immigrants, as I was, are naturally drawn to multimedia storytelling. They can't imagine, why would you have ever had something called a newspaper that didn't have a photo, or in fact, what is this idea of a newspaper that doesn't also have a video aspect to it, or that I can't retweet, or I can't easily send to my friends? You mean you actually, Dad, you actually used to cut out an article and Xerox it and send it to people? Or what a crazy thing to do. How did you waste so much time? So that's going to happen naturally. As to the sort of universal Esperanto vision, I hope I live long enough to see a universal translator. I would love to be able to hear myself speak in Arabic, for example. And whatever the technology is, and German will be a challenge, as Nikesh said, people will use it, and I think there is an opportunity to sort of write once and achieve an audience around the world. But it'll be a ways off, at least based on what I've seen lately.
I have a few more seconds, and I want to conclude with one question. You had 5 million bloggers in Egypt. You have 180,000 in Yemen. Mm-hmm. You have an Arab youth saying what it wants to say in certain places, more enabled more by the social media than in other places. And you have sort of the birth of the new Arab. What do you see? What do you see for that Arab youth? Mm-hmm. And when you take a look at the fact that there's 5 million in Egypt, 180,000 in Yemen, and that you have Iran, for example, forbidding anybody to look into its own revolution, or the world actually being interested in helping that revolution in Iran. So take a look at the region and give me the future in less than a minute.
Well, I think Iran is a very special case. So let me limit myself first to just the direct region here. I think it is a very encouraging sign that the natural human aspirations of people for information, for non-corrupt, transparent government, for jobs, for a chance at prosperity, these are positive things. And the fact that the information technology allows people to look across borders and see that actually we're not that different than our neighbors, and that there are universal aspirations is quite interesting. Without naming countries, I think the reason why you see such strict filtering of developments that are going on here in large countries with very robust firewalls is that they're worried about just those sort of conclusions and connections being made, that, look, these people are not that different than we, and it is not a unique condition of being Iranian that I should live differently than someone who's Egyptian.
So you don't think the Iranians will be spared the social media revolution?
I think the present efforts will retard that, but eventually it will fail.
Well, please join me in thanking Tom Glocer. I think this was a fascinating conversation, and thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Tom and Raghida, for the great insights into the interplay between spontaneous and institutional news gathering. Thank you. It is time now for some